All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's just a little after 7, and I want to welcome everybody to our April work session. We have a few items on the agenda tonight, and so let's just go ahead and get started. We've got a slim crowd tonight. First up, we will have one proclamation. This is something that we do every year for Arbor Day. It started when we received the historic tree designation for the champion tree in our downtown area, and it's just time to do that again this year. And I believe there's a copy of that in the e-packet. This has been done by other people in the past. Jane just put my name by it. If there's someone else that would like to do it, they're welcome to. If not, we can all get credit for it. Good deal. We will have no old business, but we will have new business. And want to start with item number 1, and that is a stream buffer variance request. And before I recognize Kaipo, I wanted to ask if, Frank, if you can kind of maybe tell us for the new members on this, how we would deal with this type of variance as a council. And I believe you might be prepped to do that.
Thank you, Mayor. We did a zoning presentation recently, and as part of that presentation, reminded folks or folks that were new, had a conversation about the council's ability to sit in 2 different capacities. The council can sit in a legislative capacity, and the council can sit in what is called a quasi-judicial capacity. When council is considering actions that are traditional zoning actions, like rezoning a piece of property from one classification to another, or considering text amendments to your zoning ordinance, or placing a zoning on a piece of property as part of an annexation, those types of decisions are called zoning decisions, and the council sits in a legislative capacity. In this situation where the council is considering a variance, the council sits instead in a quasi-judicial capacity. So actions like variances or appeals of administrative interpretations of your zoning ordinance, special use permits, conditional use permits, things of that nature, those are not considered zoning decisions. Those are decisions that are considered quasi-judicial in nature. And so since this is a variance request, the council is sitting more in a judicial capacity. When the council sits in a judicial capacity, you are to be focused more on the hearing itself and the information that is actually presented in the hearing, because you're sitting as the judge and the jury, you're not sitting as a legislator. So in these decisions, you really shouldn't go out and do independent investigation and on your own. You should listen to what's presented in the hearing, ask the questions that are necessary in the hearing, and then when you make a decision, your decision should be based on the information that's been presented to you in that hearing. And you should make your decision based on that information, and then when you sit in a quasi-judicial capacity, you kind of have to give reasons, factual and legal basis for making that decision. So basing it on the information provided by staff or by the applicant and saying that that's the reason that you're approving it. Whereas when you're sitting in your legislative capacity, it's just the opposite. When you're sitting in a zoning and legislative capacity, I don't need or necessarily want you to give any reasons for making the decision. When you're sitting in a legislative capacity, you just need to make the decision, because when we get to appeals, those are handled differently. And in a legislative capacity, I can build a record on appeal to support your decision, so you don't have to give reasons for that decision in your meeting. When you're sitting in a quasi-judicial capacity, I can't build a record. I'm stuck with the record that was built before you in this hearing. So in your variance situation, the record needs to be built here in front of you at your hearing, because I don't have any ability to supplement that record on appeal. So that's kind of the difference, and here you're sitting in that quasi judicial capacity.
Thank you, Frank. Gary, does that cover what you'd hope for him to cover?
It does, and I think I've given everyone who was at the meeting and those who were not a copy of Frank's presentation. It is going to be available on video. There's a couple of extra copies here if anybody wants those.
And as always, if you have questions about anything from a procedural standpoint, you can always reach out to Frank. All right, Kaipo, I'll now recognize you to talk about the variance request.
We're presenting a request for a stream buffer variance at 5952 and 5962 Cumming Highway. Subject property is next to the Zaxby's on Highway 20. The existing intermittent stream is seen some better days. It's experiencing some undercutting of the banks, some trash in the riparian corridor, presumably coming off some of the upper properties or the highway. There's a photo, there's a small, there's an area of wetlands in this vicinity. That's what these images are showing. You can see some of the litter appears to have been there for some time. They are requesting encroachment and disturbance and improvements in the impervious 75-foot impervious setback, as well as the 50-foot undisturbed stream buffer area. These are the areas associated with those disturbances. You can see this stream kind of originates and flows across the front of the properties from a pipe system from one of the upstream properties. I'm not sure exactly where that upstream flow comes from, if it's from a pond on one of the adjoining property or one of the nearby properties, or an old system from the highway. But it is an intermittent stream. Applicant is also pursuing all of their approval variances with EPD and permitting with Army Corps for the other encroachments of the state buffer and the wetland disturbance. Staff's recommending approval of the variance with the condition that the on-site mitigation is accomplished with procedures in the Gwinnett Stormwater Manual as provided by our ordinance.
Thank you, Kaipo. If I may begin with just a couple of questions, and I'll ask if there are other questions.
Mayor, because you're going to be sitting in quasi judicial capacity, the hearing and questions should be next week.
Okay.
We really shouldn't have any discussion of it this week because you have one hearing and everything needs to be presented in that one hearing.
Sounds good. We'll move on. Thank you. Sorry. All right. We'll now move on to item number 2, GMEBS. That's a long acronym for something. Paul?
Mayor, the GMEB stands for the Georgia Municipal Employee Benefit System. It was created by the Georgia Municipal Association years ago to provide some economies of scale for retirement plans. It now has 290 members that are part of that. They manage about $3 billion worth of assets of cities from around the state in their retirement systems. The retirement systems, we are in that system, as well as City of Cumming, Duluth, Flowery Branch, Norcross, and Suwanee and Beaufort, the cities around us that are part of it as well. We joined it in April 1st of 2018. You have before you a restatement of the current plan that GMEBS is requesting us to adopt. As I said, we adopted the GMEBS defined benefit retirement plan in April of 2018. It consists of the basic plan document, which is a very thick document that GMA through GMEBS has developed. And then we have our adoption agreement that it outlines the city's plan document, and then the service credit addendum that is how we proceeded to provide service credit to the employees that came into the system. It's considered a qualified plan under the Internal Revenue Code, which is important to the tax-exempt status of the GMEBS Trust Fund. And to continue to protect this tax-qualified status, GMEBS filed a draft restated plan documents with the IRS in June of 2022, and they updated to include recent amendments and to comply with changes in federal law. And on August 31st of 2023, the IRS issued a favorable opinion letter for the restated plan documents. So the IRS opinion provides assurance to the employers, such as Sugar Hill, that are providing retirement benefits for their employees, that GMEBS is maintaining a qualified plan, and that the program allows employees to accrue benefits that are tax-free until retirement. Benefits are distributed to them, and to ensure the tax-qualified status of all GMEBS members, and the participating employers like the city of Sugar Hill is being asked to readopt the plan using the most recent IRS-approved document templates. So to accomplish this, it's a lot of acronyms. GMEBS has completed and provided a new adoption agreement and service credit purchase addendum, which includes the benefit and eligibility provisions that the city has in place currently. And once approved by the City Council and executed by the mayor, we will scan the documents and email them back to GMA and GMEBS. GMEBS will then review the documents to make sure that they were adopted properly and executed properly, and then we'll return electronic copies once they have countersigned them for our files and for our auditor. So that's what you have, a lot of documents. It is basically a restatement of the existing plan that covers the employees of the city of Sugar Hill. It's a defined benefit plan.
Thank you, Paul. I know it's been beneficial for some of our longer-serving employees, and it's also been a recruitment tool in kind of bringing in new employees. So are there any questions of Paul? Yes, sir. Mr. Purple.
I understand that this is updating the plan we're currently on, but I don't think you find any businesses out there that have been on defined benefit plans for 30 years. They're pretty much all defined contribution plans. I understand, why people want to be on that, but that's usually a massive liability on whoever's funding it, and then it's quite frequent that they are underfunded, and you see a lot of reports about problems when people go to collect and those funds aren't there. Hopefully being managed by the GMA, that would be maybe better than what some other businesses have done, but I'd like more information on why we're on this, and what our liabilities would be long-term and as they grow and that sort of thing, versus the defined contribution, which is like the 401k that pretty much everyone has, where the amount of money going in is what is defined, and it's usually on a match percentage, or even if it's not matched, there's a certain amount put in, versus the defined benefit plan where you're guaranteed the amount going that you pull out as opposed to the amount going in.
Do you want me to comment on that?
Absolutely.
Okay. First of all, I think one of the reasons that the City Council took the action to move to the defined benefit plan was the plan that was in place was a 457 match and a 3% contribution to a 401A. And that was just not going to provide sufficient retirement coverage for any employee, even with supplemental Social Security. And so after a lot of analysis, we recommended that we join the defined benefit plan of GMA. Now, I agree, many have gone away from defined benefit plan, particularly in the private sector, particularly those that are in a collective bargaining agreement area. We're not in such, there is no allowed collective bargaining in Georgia for municipal employees. This plan currently that we have is 94.2% coverage ratio. The minimum would be 60%. 80% is considered the norm. We're at 94.2%. And so we've done a really good job of making sure that we have, we're covering our liabilities. And our annual audit shows that we're far exceeding any of the standards out there for liability coverage. We've had 6 employees since I've been here that have retired. One that retired, unfortunately, passed away, so there's a 7th one. But this has provided them the opportunity for years of service to the city to retire. It is a 2% plan. How it's calculated is that you take your last 5 years annual, your highest 5 years of salary or income times the years of service times 2%, and that is your yearly benefit. And it's our plan is probably similar to most plans. I think Beaufort has a 3% plan. Ours is a 2% plan. Sewanee, the rest of them are at 2%. One of the reasons it's important is portable. It's so if an employee comes from another city that's been part of the GMEBS plan, they can then come and get years of service here, and it ports with them. Same if they leave. But in recruiting staff, having a defined benefit is extraordinarily important in municipal government. There's 536 cities in the state. 290 of them are part of the GMEB system. So it's in terms of cost, it is slightly higher cost annually than it was for the 457 match and the 401A contribution of 3%. But not all of our employees were even participating in the 457 match back then. Now we can say that it's a good retention tool, and they can still contribute to a 457. We provide all the encouragement every year at the annual time of re-upping that they should consider 457 as a supplement to this. I think just keeps us competitive. It makes us one of the best places to work. So that's my reasons for it. And I don't think it's any more costly than what we had before. But I'm most proud of the fact that we've been able to budget annually for the coverage to maintain. My goal is to get to 100% of coverage. We're at 94.2%. So.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, Gary?
I have some follow-up questions. So you mentioned people transferring in. So if they transfer in, what percent, and I guess whatever accredited funds or accumulated funds, those kind of stay with them. But to what extent, let's say they've had 20 years somewhere else and 2 years here and retire, to what extent are we paying for that other 20 years? How does that work?
Well, I can look right across here and tell you one.
Okay.
That's right there. Jane, that city of Stone Mountain for years, under GMA's plan. And let's say she's got another 15, 20 years here. When I know she doesn't have 40 years of service because she's not that old. But GMA keeps a separate stack.
I'm asking.
For the city of Stone Mountain, and keeps a separate stack for the city of Sugar Hill. So when that person retires, we have a 5-year vesting option. You have to be here for 5 years to vest. Once you've vested and you retire, then GMA, when they send out the check, will send out one check, but it'll come from 2 different sources in the trust fund.
So
We
we're
have
only
no
paying for
liability the previous person.
we're only paying for their terms of service here, though.
Yes, sir.
Right? Okay. And so since this is paid into by multiple cities, is there any sort of penalty or management if another city becomes derelict on paying their amount of it? Do we incur that liability, or how does that work?
You know, our plan is assessed based upon our coverage ratio. But now I can tell you that GMEBS takes it seriously if you have a city that is not getting close to the required IRS standards. They will either freeze the assets and then stop that plan, or they will go in and do a plan where that city council has to catch up.
But all that liability would be limited to that city. It's not like a
Correct.
shared liability thing or anything like that.
Correct.
Okay. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Questions?
Thank you, Paul. All right, any other questions? Yes, Taylor?
I'll just make a couple of comments on this with regard to what employee retention and how important that is. Gwinnett County had a defined benefit, and they went away from that, and as a result of that, they lost a lot of their employees, and now are experiencing extraordinarily high turnover as they don't have a defined benefit. And defined benefit doesn't trap you in your job, but it certainly is an incentive to stick around. And I think that's something that's important for us. And one of the reasons that we do have so many employees that have stayed with the city for as long as they have, and that retention of knowledge comes at a extraordinary discount to us because new employees are expensive, and training them and then seeing them leave is expensive as well. So I think the defined benefit program we have is financially responsible, but it also is fiscally responsible because it does provide higher retention rates that would otherwise cost the city money through turnover. So I just want to make that point, that defined benefit plans, especially in a small scale that we are at, unlike a collective bargaining situation where you do end up with companies that are not funding properly or have negotiated in bad faith with unions, and they make concessions that they have no way of actually meeting, which is what we see so often, particularly in the automotive industry. That's not the case that we have here, although it is certainly something to be cognizant of and question because of the high-profile nature of those bankruptcies that happen when those pensions go south. So, but in our case, the GMEBS plan is vastly different and vastly differently funded than a collective bargaining and a company who is going to put profits over people in many cases, or shareholder returns over people in the case of automotive industry. So anyway, just some comments on our defined benefit plan.
Thank you, Taylor. Paul, any other comments?
I was going to comment one point is that we are, unlike our northeastern brethren in the municipal government that are subject to collective bargaining, we're not, but we have, our coverage ratio is high, and I think that the point that Gary made a minute ago was that since they have separate stacks where we are protected as a city, but GMA is a very conservative investor, and it's similar to the state retirement system and the teacher's retirement system. Both are defined benefit, but the fact that we have a professional group that's managing this money that helps leverage those assets that help grow the coverage ratio, I think is vitally important. So appreciate y'all's comments.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, we'll move on now to item number 3, and that is the GDOT LMIG application, round 2. Troy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I might have mentioned this at the last meeting. The state has authorized a supplemental budget identifying additional funding for the local maintenance improvement grant program administered by Georgia Department of Transportation. What that means for Sugar Hill is that we have an additional amount of funds that are going to be designated for that program. Those total up to $306,314.17. They are going to be opening up the application process for the second round of LMIG funding shortly. We have looked at our upcoming list of road improvements and conditions, and we feel like based on Garrett Paving's unit prices, we should be able to complete an additional 1.5 miles of additional roadway repairs in this contract. When looking at those roads, it totals up to 6 streets that we pulled from the upcoming year's programs. And we have identified a list of streets that's in the council memo for you, but I'll just list them out. Somerset Rose Lane, Ellsbury Court, Sudbury Point Lane, Malt D Court, Pine Isle Way, Diggers Way. Those are in various neighborhoods. 2 of them are in the same neighborhood, but they all have road scores ranging from a low of 19 up to 52. Those are average road scores for different segments along that roadway, so I do want to mention that before we get into the details and particulars. I did provide some condition assessment documentation in the memo with photographs of those conditions for, I started with Pine Isle Way because it was one of the worst on the list, and it is one of those that stands out from the rest of the roadways in the neighborhood. So it cleans up that particular neighborhood and finishes that one out. You'll see some of the separation in the transverse cracking and the alligator cracking. Somerset Rose Lane also scored very poorly. It has a segment that is in very poor shape, and then there are some segments of the road that are okay, but the road needs to be repaired, as you saw from the photographs. Ellsbury Court is also one of those that is a sub 40 PCI rating and is experiencing some alligator cracking in the photos. Malt D Court is also one that cleans up an entire neighborhood. It's the last street in Bent Creek. Is one rather long street, but is in need of repair, and I've provided some photographs in the memo as well. And then with that, I've got a vicinity map that shows you the locations of those and the neighborhood subdivision street names. We also have an item on the agenda after this one about the pavement management policy, and I can talk a little bit more about the strategies for improving our overall average PCI rating for the city in that presentation. But the staff has looked at all these streets. I personally went out and looked at them last week, and our field staff in the Public Works Department presented these for my consideration for this presentation.
All right, Troy, thank you. Any questions of Troy?
I've got a couple of comments. I certainly don't disagree with any of the roads you got there based on the pictures. So I'm happy to see that done. Some additional comments, but I think I'll wait and hear what you say in the next segment and then add them. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And again, this is just to authorize me to sign the application to the State Department of Transportation for the funds, which will be allocated to us based on my understanding of how the process works, right? So I think every city has gotten an amount. All right. Any other questions of Troy before we move on? Yes?
This might go into your next point, but I know like off of Whitehead Road, Somerset Rose Lane, and we've got the red road that we're gonna do, but you got the main road in yellow, so I'm assuming probably the next part we're gonna talk about additional other items. So I might be putting the cart before the horse, Troy, on that one, but on other additional things that we could do besides repaving. Okay.
Only Troy knows that. He'll talk about it next time, sure. All right, all good questions, comments. Any other questions or comments before we move on to the policy piece? All right, Troy, you're up again next, item number 4.
We had discussed a strategy for developing a policy for pavement management, policy development, I should say, and I put a little more thought into it. I will say we've been fighting the flu bug at City Hall for a couple of 3 weeks now, and I think everybody's had a chance to experience it. So last week was a little short for me. And then we have also We'll talk a little bit about the construction update as well, but haven't really updated some of our photos in a while for the same reason. With the pavement management policy that we talked about last month, we wanted to establish some guidance language for the process of addressing our pavement condition in Sugar Hill and discussing a way to set some standards for implementing our roadway resurfacing program. We talked about these kinds of guiding principles where we assess the pavement condition annually, or at a minimum of annually. We talked about recording some of the key attribute data in a database, and we would develop and maintain that. An update on this particular item, we did acquire software licensing and hardware for our own process of providing these pavement condition assessments. We have trained on it and we've deployed it. We have not sent the data off for post-processing, so it may be another week or two before I have that information back. But as I mentioned in this presentation, it's a way of taking out some of the human element. And by that, I mean the subjective part of it that may vary from person to person as to what a road's condition score should be. If we've used the last two times one particular consultant, but I don't know the technician's name that was doing the assessment in 2016 versus the one we completed in 2022. So you can have some variability in that. I'm not saying that it is a large variation in the number or the scoring, but this takes out that element and introduces some a computing capability that we don't really have as a part of the process currently, and that allows us to analyze a larger volume of data. It is visually structured, so it will address the condition of what it sees. It will assess the condition of what it sees as a part of the camera that's associated with the equipment. And when we get the data back, I'll provide you a presentation of what that looks like as well. With that, using that data that we collect on a regular basis to make the decision-making easier and informative, and also a little more standardized. The fourth item there is maintaining some judgment, engineering judgment in the process. I'll speak to the selection of some of the streets that I just mentioned in the last presentation, which had to do with where the streets are in relation to the rest of the neighborhood. So we had Pine Isle Way, which was a score of 20 or less in a neighborhood that had 6 other streets with very good road conditions. And I can't recall off the top of my head if we delayed implementation on that street for some reason, but completing an entire neighborhood gives the neighborhood some consistency, and that's the judgment, maybe not engineering judgment, but good judgment about how we select certain streets. And then methodical execution of that plan once we establish this policy. I presented to you our report card from the 2022 pavement condition assessment. The horizontal lines on the graph, the green one represents the median score. The yellow one is the average score of all of our street segments in Sugar Hill based on that 2022 assessment. The beige-looking curve is the graph of the total number of segments in the city, some nearly 760 segments. And you'll see that most of them lie above a PCI score of 60, which is on the left side of the graph. One of the things that I would like to recommend later on in the presentation is some metrics that we aim for in terms of goals. One would be to maintain an average PCI rating of 85 or above, or for example, a median score of 90 or above. And then in addition to that, eliminating all streets with a score of less than 20. So we have no road segments less than 20 as one of the goals behind the policy and program. So as we talk about this is a summary of what those goals would be and what it looks like in terms of format may change, but the numbers would remain the same. I think I said average of 90 or above, but it could be average of 85 or above with a median of 90, as I mentioned in the last graph, and then nothing below a 20 as far as PCI score. And if I didn't say PCI, is pavement condition index. Repaving would represent less than 70% of the repair budget, and I'll talk a little bit about what I want to suggest or recommend as a part of the balance of that, which is that we reserve some 20% of that repair budget towards pavement preservation methods, and those aren't necessarily seal coating or providing some impervious layer on it. It could be crack sealing. It could be something that buys us 3 to 5 years of additional life on that particular street. It'll also help keep some of the alligator cracking and some of the things that really undermine your ability to come back and just resurface over what's there. I think one of the comments was also related to signage and striping, and then we want to make sure that we accommodate that to stay in compliance with our regulatory requirements on signage. And then striping may not affect many neighborhoods, but is a big part of the maintenance program for the entire right-of-way. I obviously didn't total that up to 100%, and that's to give us some flexibility in this discussion, and we can talk a little bit more about what we may want to address in that. The annual budget, I use the term shall, but let me just go ahead and say this is a recommendation, should equal a certain number times the LMIG amount that we are allocated annually and be composed of a combination of LMIG, SPLOST, and perhaps city funds. And also the recommendation to beef up our utility encroachment permitting process, so we require utility owners to repair road cuts to 150% of their trench width, for example. That allows the tie-in point to be sufficiently beyond the trench location so that it ties it in a little bit better. And then we can also make it much more difficult to open cut a street for convenience rather than using some directional boring methods that are less intrusive. Okay, so I have these out of order, but the top of the page, we just had pop up there that we want to do these pavement assessments at least annually as a part of the recommendation. And then lastly, just to bracket the whole thing, is benchmark periodically against national averages. And we can include a statistical goal for maintaining our PCI average in the 95th percentile, for example. I'd like to get some more information from our current pavement assessment tool software that we're using and get a better idea of where we're actually at with that result compared to the Atlas Technical Consulting result. And that is what I would be putting together in terms of a policy document with some of the goals in mind related to this particular.
All right, thank you, Troy. Any questions, Troy?
I've got some comments.
All right.
Let me just do a quick calculation here. So one of the things you mentioned was no streets less than 20. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that number should be like nothing less than 60. You did send me a map. We had an email. I was asking about this last week. We had asked when he presented previously the map of all the graded streets in the city, which is a bit out of date. But what I asked was that there was a color index, blue being the highest, and then green, and then yellow and everything below. Streets in my subdivision were green. I don't think they meet that standard. There's lateral cracks every 50 to 100 feet and some alligator cracking, not extensive, but just using that for reference because I drive it every day, and I'm thinking if that's green, one, I don't think that's accurate, but it certainly needs to be green or above. So I asked about getting to that standard. The funding amounts that we're getting from the previous state amount and this current one, 860,000 we're spending, equated to about 4.5 miles. I believe in your email you said there's 79, so roughly 80 miles in the city, right? So if we're doing only 4.5 miles a year, that would take about 17.7 years to cover the city, which I don't think the streets on average hold up that long. I wanted to see that increased where we're having a top end of no more than 15 years instead of 17 years. That would take us up to 5.33 miles per year. I think what you're proposing here appears to be significantly higher than that, which I'm all for, because I think we need at least a catch-up period to get caught up with where some of the roads are. If my math was correct on the, if we're currently doing 860 and you're saying 3, now that's the additional amount, not just not just the initial, but the total amount. That would be about $2.58 million, which again, I don't have a problem with that. If we were going off the number that was the initial, which was 650,000, and that was what, 3 times? That'd be 1.95 million. So 2 to 2.5 million or so is the number we're talking about if that is the standard. And I think that will go down over time. I think there's certainly a catch-up period we need. I certainly like the idea of doing, catching cracks and that sort of thing, and perhaps doing sealants or whatever to prevent them from getting to that state and extending the life of the roads. I'm all for that as well. But and correct me if my math is wrong, but that's what I get there based on this proposal, and I'm very happy with it.
Thank you. You went through the math pretty fast, I'm going to be honest with you. But I appreciate you going through it. Troy, any response or?
I will say that the recommendation on this particular slide is 3 times the LMIG amount, and I think I prepared this slide when we knew the LMIG amount was about 300,000. So even if you doubled it and said it was 300 plus the original amount of 500 or 600, that's still in the range of the number we're talking about. And I would suggest that the annual budget target could be 3 times the LMIG amount until we achieve the PCI average of whatever it is, and then reevaluate.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you again, Gary. Any other questions or?
I have a few comments.
Yes, sir.
I think I would like to see us be a little bit more aggressive on the lower PCI. I mean, 60 is very aggressive. I don't know if that's even attainable. I mean, in the first couple years of inception. I mean, but I think we're at 20. There's not too many roads under 20 as it is right now. I mean, 30, 35, even a 40. So I don't know if that's doable. And then question about preservation. What amount of budget are we spending currently over the past couple years in terms of preservation? Do we allocate a lot currently, or what are we looking like right now?
It's packaged in the same contract
Okay.
with our LMIG program.
Okay.
So it's crack sealing primarily, but we have done the mineral bond application in limited locations. I would like to look at doing that process in a neighborhood. And one of the recommendations that I would like to consider is the mineral bond application for certain streets above 75 to 80 PCI score. And what that does is that gives you another 5 to 10 years of life on that road. So it buys you some more time. It is easier to apply in the entire neighborhood, gives the whole neighborhood a clean look. And I've got some pricing in on that. I think I a $4 a square yard price a few months ago. But that's the price structure, and I think now we're at $10, $12 a yard for traditional paving work that we do. So it's cost effective, it adds life to it, but that's something I would like to add as a separate contract. There are typically different types of contractors that do that. And then microsurfacing is something we've not really done much of, but for roads that are in better shape, it's a better way to preserve the life of something like that may not be as good as 80 to 85.
Yeah. Do you have any information on like the roads that are under 40, like longevity of what those lasted? Are those going towards our 20? Are they longer than 20 years? Or, I mean, any info on that regard of how long they've been
I do
paved?
not.
I don't know if we even have stuff that far back, but
I don't. Let me say that I think one of the recommendations that will come out of this is that we maintain a better set of records. A lot of what was done prior to me coming, we engaged Georgia DOT to actually implement the program. So GDOT would contract with somebody to do Buford roads, Sugar Hill roads, and, you know, roads in the area. So we might have had a record of the original letter, but we don't have a database. We've got a copy of a letter, and it's just something that wasn't tracked real well. I think with our GIS capabilities now, we've got the basis for keeping very good records of what we've completed to date and then how long a certain section of road. One of the other things that we would want to look at is spot repairs. So I think there were a couple of examples in Mr. Perkle's neighborhood where, you know, there's a segment of road that is really bad. But there may be the rest of the road that's okay, so we might have to do some spot repairs, and perhaps that's a location where we do a combination of deep patching for some of the locations and then the microsurfacing for the rest of the road. So it's going to be a combination, and that's where the engineering judgment comes in. One of the things that you saw from the map was that we color code the entire length of the street, but we basically had to average some of the segments within that. So it's just difficult to see on a large map that each individual segment of a road. So we do the best we can with.
thanks, Troy.
A few additional. Yes, sir. So I'm certainly not suggesting my neighborhood is the worst by any means. I know there's a lot worse, particularly the Springs being one of them, Sugar Ridge Drive. But I just use that as reference because I drive it and see it every day. I do have a question about the mineral bond. What is that going like a tar coating or something? So it's more of a liquid thing? What is the depth of it? Is it like a quarter of an inch, or does that raise it a half inch or more, or it's lower than that? And then what does it look like? Is it black like regular asphalt, or what does the final result look like?
It's a spray-on application, and it does provide a very, I'll say it's a thicker surface than like a seal coat. Couldn't tell you how many mils or inches it would be or represent, but I can get that for you. The two locations we have completed are the driveway to the golf course, and I think that was 2 years ago. And I'll find out the dates on that for Monday night. And I think the Swanee Dam Road parking lot at Gary Perkle Park. And those two locations were done about 2 or 3 years ago. It's a product that is, I think, a part of the GDOT specification for mineral bond application if you find it. But I can provide that to you by email and see how it's applied and the thickness and that kind of thing.
And I guess one other thing, how long have those been in use? Is there a decent track record to know we're going to get a good return off of that?
Yeah, I think the examples I've seen are in Fayette County uses it quite extensively in their pavement management program. So they've got a good track record of that. They've been using it for 10 years or so. Like I said, GDOT Office of Materials has approved it.
All good questions and comments, Troy. I have one. What is the next step on this? Do you suggest that we adopt this policy at our next meeting, or would you rather have the data from the software first, or what's your thoughts?
I think I would like to have the data, and we can compare it to where we're at with my recommended PCI average. So worst case is this automated method comes back with a PCI rating that's lower than what I have here in the 2022 score. Then we get a larger couple of first steps in the process that may inform where we set the standard for rating. So I may be able to get it this week, but it's not likely to happen. So I would recommend maybe a May action item.
do you want us to keep this on the agenda and we can just maybe table it at the next meeting if the date is not ready? Is that, okay, we'll do that. Yes, Taylor, sorry.
Troy, one of the components of streets is curb and gutter, the concrete curb and gutter. I think it would be good to have some sort of statement on how we manage curb and gutter in the city, when we replace it, budgeting for replacement of it. While it lasts much longer than asphalt, concrete curb and gutter does have a lifespan, and at some point we'll need to have replacement. I've had residents ask me about curb and gutter in front of their home. Most of the time it's cosmetic, but oftentimes you can see some of the aggregate, some of the base of it is starting to fail. So I would just encourage, as part of our policy, would be to also be analyzing curb and gutter, making sure that that is a consideration, as well as sidewalks. Heaving is obviously a big problem with sidewalks, particularly around catch basins, again, part of the storm drainage system. And having some way of repairing our sidewalks. Sidewalks typically last quite a long time, usually in the 50-year range, but there will be segments that will need to be replaced. So maybe some sort of statement about heaving if they reach a certain, I don't know what there may be some sort of guidance as far as when something becomes a trip hazard that we would be mindful of and monitoring for those kinds of issues as well. And you had, in your presentation, mentioned a 95th percentile against a national average. I would suggest that maybe we just need to stick to probably Metro Atlanta or something like that, just because the variability of pavement across the country is so high because of the varying weather conditions, and paving requirements, for that matter, across the country are very high. Typically in Metro Atlanta, in my experience and talking with other folks, is that a residential street, assuming it's well constructed, which is admittedly sometimes a dangerous assumption, should last 25 to 30 years, assuming it's built per the specifications that are provided to the contractors. That's just been my experience, and the road I live on has been the same. It's not been repaved, and it's 23 years old now, and it's showing its age. Probably could use a good crack seal on it, but it's lasted about as long as you would expect a residential street in Metro Atlanta to last. So I would just encourage our benchmarking be against Metro Atlanta roads, just given our climate. It would be, I think it is a better benchmark than national averages. But I'd be curious how we rank nationally. I mean, I would be an interesting, based on traveling across this country, our roads in Metro Atlanta are significantly better than the vast majority of the country, even better than Florida, in my opinion, even though they get routinely. Anyway, so I just wanted to add that I think that, and I appreciate you, striping is big because of the safety aspect of it, so in budgeting for that, stop bars in particular, but crosswalks, and then of course the edge of pavement as well for our roads that are not curb and gutter are a big deal. Plus with automated lane keeping assist in many vehicles now, that helps with helping those vehicles maintain their lanes and that sort of thing. So I appreciate you giving consideration to that as well in that pavement policy. And that's all I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other? Yes.
I have another question. When we're looking at the mineral bond, is that something, is it a one-time done and after that we can't do it again? Or is that something, we're looking 5-10 years down the road, we're like, well, the road's not necessarily failing, but the mineral bond could be refreshed. Is that something that we could look into, or is it kind of one and done thing?
I'm going to tell you I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out. I think it's reasonable to assume that you could keep refreshing the impermeable layer to an extent. At some point, there are going to be other...
Yeah, and I'm not saying, 50 years do it, but I mean, some of our residential, they're dead end, 5 houses. Like, well, how much are they actually getting used?
Right.
So, okay. Thanks, Troy.
All right, Taylor?
Sorry, one more comment on this. And this is something I just really, for the new members' benefit, one of the things that during rezonings that I have made a point of is when a developer comes in and asks for increased density, I have been, I'm not going to say 100% consistent, but fairly consistent in putting a condition on those zonings of the road having to be a private road, that if we're going to trade off for density, then that road would have to be maintained by the HOA. And it's just something that for you all to consider. We don't get that many rezonings anymore, but for something going forward, that has been a condition that I have placed on it, is that those roads are private and the responsibility of the HOA. And I understand that that puts an additional burden on those folks in terms of cost to maintain that road, but for me, that was a fair trade-off for the increased density on many of those projects that have been rezoned over the last 6.5 years or so. So just something to think about as we consider any future zoning cases, that is an option to keep on the table.
All right, thank you, Taylor. Any other comments, questions? All right, we will move on to solid waste. Troy, I believe that is you again. And before you start, I meant to mention this at the beginning. Alvin was in Washington, D.C. over the weekend with his son, Jace, and he was coming back for this meeting, but unfortunately experienced a flight delay, and that is why he is not here. So he wanted me to pass that along to everybody. Troy, sorry.
We have reached out to our waste management contact and presented some of the recommended goals of negotiating contract amendment. And where we find ourselves is that they were able to accomplish a few things related to the terms of the contract, and they're listed on the slide here. I don't have particular details yet, and we need to kind of have some dialogue about whether this is sufficient to get us to that place or not. They do envision that there may be a slight rate increase to accomplish some of the other goals that I'll get to in the next couple of items for residential accounts that would not be considered senior or qualifying senior rates. They do think they can offer a senior rate for a smaller cart, and tying that to the homestead exemption qualification for our senior homestead exemption, and that would be for a 65-gallon cart in lieu of a 95-gallon cart. And please do not hold me to the size of the cart, because I've seen some that are 95-gallon, some of the older ones, some of the newer ones are 94, 93, 64, 65. So I'm just going to say the 65 and 95-gallon are the two sizes that I want to talk about. And so that would be what would be associated with the senior rate for a smaller cart. They do feel like they can add weekly recycling back into the schedule. They would have to eliminate the residential franchise fee to accomplish that, and that would be, I think it's at 4% currently, and if I threw a number at you, it might be something like $50,000 number annually. So it's that's why I get the number. So I can pull together one of the invoices from, or the check payments from Waste Management last year and try and get a better number of what that means. They would want to, and I would recommend keeping the commercial franchise fee at 5%, and also to adjust the commercial rate by 5% annually, or the CPI, whichever is greater. And that just helps offset some of the costs for the adjustments to the residential accounts. I think off the top of my head, there's 7,000 residential solid waste accounts and probably less than 1,000 commercial accounts, and I may be high on the commercial side, but that's generally what it is. Lastly, they did not see a way to offer any kind of bag service as an option. So that's where we're at. We can keep pressing on with the detailed terms if we think we're heading in the right direction. But again, that's as much effort as I was able to put into this since the last.
I think it would be good to provide you some feedback, if you don't mind, Troy, on this maybe initial round of conversation with the provider. I will say, I happened to be on Facebook just before coming here in Duluth. They were doing like an online town hall talking about it, and they are moving away from the bag option and making some changes as well. So I think change is kind of pretty consistent all over right now. But any feedback for Troy? Questions, comments? Meg? Yes, ma'am.
The first item, slight rate for residential accounts, non-senior. What do you mean by a slight rate?
Well, my word did not make it into the final version of this, but it's a slight rate increase for residential accounts. And if I were going to say a number, it might be $1. And that would be for all non-senior accounts.
Okay. I like the idea of the senior rate for the smaller cart. But on the other hand, I feel like that's not fair to a two-person household who have not yet reached senior age. But I know there are other cities that do offer a senior rate. And I think being that it's tied to the homestead exemption would be easy to figure out who qualifies for that. And of course, I really like adding the weekly recycling because a lot of residents have asked me about that. Most of this sounds pretty good. I don't think you're talking about a very high, that's what, a slight rate increase. If we're getting more service, that's certainly something to consider. I mean, I was hoping to keep it the same, but we're heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Meg. Good comments, and I think we're already low in comparison to other cities, right? I mean, very, very low. So if it is minimal, it's probably not going to end up being more than most other cities around us. But yes, Josh.
Troy, I have a question. I know we're keeping, or in talks of keeping the commercial franchise fees at 5%. Do you think there might be an opportunity to increase the commercial? I mean, go ahead and increase the commercial franchise fee in lieu of them offering something that Meg proposed of a wide broad of having the option of a 95 versus a 65 and not necessarily tie it to a senior? I don't know if that's even an option at all, versus, so people with a smaller household has the opportunity to have a smaller trash can. I guess that at that point that'd be 3 different tiers, and I don't know if that kind of complicates or muddies the water, and they probably want to keep it as easy as possible. So I understand that part, but
Yeah, we do hear from the commercial customers from time to time about the rates being high and their inability to go out for their own pricing structure. So we do already get some pushback from
Okay.
our commercial accounts. I would say that we could subsidize to some extent the rate structure if you chose to do so. It's just one of those ways that you could keep the rate consistent without doing any kind of rate increase.
yeah. I guess my only comment would be somehow figure out a way to accommodate a normal residential household that maybe they're just double income, no kids, and they're in their 40s and they just want a smaller trash can, and maybe offer them a slightly less rate, just an option. So I'm not even sure if that would be something they would be willing to entertain, but that'd be really my only comment.
I think the cost of the waste itself is not a
Sure.
big number. It's not a big component of the total individual account cost. It is driving to an address, stopping, picking up the cart. And that makes sense to me. I haven't looked at the analysis for each individual account, but I imagine the actual waste itself is not a big part of it.
Troy, would, I guess, and following along the lines that Josh is going here, I guess there would be an initial investment, though, by the waste management provider of the cans that they would need to recoup at some point in time. I would suggest that's probably the only hesitancy that they might have, but from a logistics standpoint, they're still going to that driveway and picking up a can. It doesn't really matter what size it is. No, and it's all really handled on the bill anyways. So I get where he's going. That would be a great option if they would go with it.
I think the waste provider would love a one-size-fits-all.
I got it.
Whatever it is.
I get
Let's
that.
say it was, it's set 1866 or 1966, it's 1750, and everybody gets the same price, everybody's happy, but at some point, somebody's going to have to make up that gap somehow. So it's a franchise fee, we eliminate all of it, we don't collect anything from the waste provider, or we subsidize it some other way. So there's a lot of different ways you can skin the cat.
Yeah, Gary.
A few additional comments there. I do like the direction it's going. Some of these echo what's already been said. Slight rate increase, I'd like to see in writing. How slight? The smaller cart, I agree. I'd like that to be an option for more than just seniors. You know, right now, they don't pick up anything if the lid's slightly open, so they're already going by volume on there. If somebody uses less volume, I don't see why they should have to, you know, pay the same amount. Duluth is getting rid of the bags, but I think it's because they have the same provider, and the provider doesn't want to do them. It's not Waste Management? Is someone else? Okay. All right. But I think the reason behind that is they're trying to go more automated and get rid of the manual pickups, and that's the reason on there. Eliminate franchise fee. I don't have a need to make money off any trash. We're out of it as far as I'm concerned. That would include commercial too. And could look at what that does to overall rates, particularly if there's already some feedback that the commercial rates are high, maybe compared to some others. I don't know that, but I'm certainly willing to listen to that. Increase commercial rate by 5% annually or CPI. I don't know that I'm ready to give both of those or that particular amount. And of course, it would somewhat determine by what we're getting in return. I think we're giving up a decent amount right now, eliminating residential franchise fee. I think if we're eliminating the commercial, and if that's only 1,000 accounts, then that could play into it as well. So again, I like to see some of those numbers and something a bit more solid. No bag service, again, I prefer it, but that's the way most of it's going, and I don't know that we're going to find anyone that's going to provide that anyway. So while I like the concept behind it, I like the way it worked, doesn't appear to be an option going forward, but I do like the direction we're going with the rest of it.
Yes, ma'am. Meg.
I would like to ask another question. On the slight rate for residential accounts, here's an option. We just had a rate increase in February. If we move to a new contract and there's a slight rate increase, could we request that this will be the rate for 2 years and not 1 year?
I can ask.
I mean, being that the rates just went up, say a new contract goes into effect in June, that means next June they're going to go up again.
I think we would try and time it in November, which is, I think, when the contract renews.
But what I'd like to see is the same rate for 2 years.
We can ask for anything, that's right.
I would
Absolutely.
like to comment back on the alternate cart size. Unless someone feels extremely strongly about that, that is an incredibly difficult logistic that I don't think Waste Management wants to take on. And I think in part of the conversation, it was, I want you to think about having us roll a truck to bring a 65-gallon cart, pick up your 95-gallon cart, and swap that out without interfering with your trash service of any kind. You know what it was like when we made changes to the contract before and how difficult that was. So I'm a little concerned that that creates some complexity we don't want to have in rolling it out. So if we get the rate reduced somehow, I would like to recommend we keep the cart size the way it is. So not even make the change. If you have a 65-gallon cart, you keep it, and everybody pays a reduced amount. And I think everybody wins in that scenario.
I think we should certainly look into that. You know, I mean, the arms on the machine are based on a certain width and perhaps a certain height. I think they could do a lower cart and use the same machine on it. There is something to what you say about the residential or about the swap out of those carts. But if it's a smaller cart, there's less volume in there, and there's no need for us to do additional subsidizing that. If it's the larger cart at a lower price, then they're not going to do that for free. Somebody's got to eat that cost. And maybe we're eating it out of the franchise fees. Maybe it's the higher rates, but I don't know that I'd be interested in a higher rate just for that. But I would definitely like to see the smaller cart options and at least price it out and see what one is versus the other.
Yeah, I think the Waste Management response on the swapping out the carts was it cost them $75 an account to get a truck out there to drop off the 65-gallon cart, pick up the old one. So that's the level that we're talking about. I talked about having them deliver them to our Public Works shop and have us deliver the 65-gallon carts. There's still some complexity in that, but we still control the cost at that point. So that is an option to have the alternate cart size. It just doesn't make a whole lot of difference in terms of per account cost that the customer pays. It doesn't.
Okay, so that's worth looking into. I mean, the reason for going to the smaller cart would be for a lower rate, and perhaps proportionally, if it's a third as much size, you know, looking at that on the rate, but I guess that's something to shake out there. The other thing, though, is, you know, when they did the rollout before, it was for pretty much every account, or at least anyone that was using bags. It was a much larger percentage of what I think going to a smaller cart would be, because a lot of people still need the larger cart.
I think it was like 1,600 accounts or some such. It was a little over 1,000 accounts that were on bag service that had to be set up in the new system. So that's the number that you would probably expect to participate in a 65-gallon program.
That's reasonable.
All right, all good questions and comments. Do you feel like you've gotten enough feedback? And I know this is just the first of many steps with them, so, all right. Now we'll move on to reports. Paul?
At your next meeting, Cindy and I should be prepared to make a recommendation on a new auditing firm. We're still doing our due diligence, background checks, and looking at fee schedules, and who the principals that will be involved, and plus how quick they can mobilize to do our audit. And so we'll have a recommendation. We've interviewed the prospective auditing firms. We're close to having a recommendation, but we don't have it for tonight. You've seen our event schedule that just came out. Avery and Victoria and her team and Chase all worked on it. Fairly aggressive schedule. It doesn't have everything on there. There's a lot of community events that are not on there. But we have announced both our Bull Series as well as Eagle Series concert schedule. And we're working with all the user groups of the theater. We continued our partnership with the with Lanier Band for providing community service in the bowl. So really pleased with where we're going there. We'll have a public safety update for you at the next meeting. And then Troy hasn't talked enough tonight, but I'll let him give a brief overview of operationally, particularly what you're seeing downtown with the completion of the rerouting of and the realignment of Elton Tucker. You can see a lot of the installation of greeneries going in around that intersection. I think it's going to be a highly functional intersection, and I think people are already getting used to it. So, Troy, with that, I'll let you update them.
Thank you. We just uploaded a monthly construction report to the website, so I encourage you to take a look at that. It does talk about the Alton Tucker realignment, with the brick paver installation and the sidewalk being the focus of much of the activity over the last couple of weeks anyway. And then, as Mr. Radford mentioned, we are including some landscaping improvements at that new intersection. With the realignment, there were some new areas that were created as part of the realignment that we will be landscaping heavily, and provides a new aesthetic to that part of the entryways into downtown Sugar Hill. We talked a little bit about the upcoming projects. Last month we mentioned the open house for the downtown streetscape improvements project. That one focuses a lot on pedestrian safety and improvement, but also addresses some consistency with regard to design standards for landscaping, for pedestrian crossing locations, how those are identified, signage, street signs related to traffic control signs, I should say, and in addition to how we use some of these spaces in the downtown area that are not really part of the roadway itself, but can be ways to activate certain spaces in the downtown. So one of the comments I think last month was that we look at adding the comment form to the website and the information board about the project on the website, which we've done. It's also downstairs in our customer service desk, so public's welcome to comment. We're going to keep that open through the middle part of this month, through the 16th, I believe, and then we'll move towards providing some updates to that project based on the input we get from that process. We are also tackling street lighting and pedestrian scale lighting as a part of that project, but also on First Avenue. We should have lighting up there by the end of this month. It'll be on the north side of First Avenue, on the east side of Peachtree Industrial, towards the railroad track. There already are 2 lights at the railroad crossing. They're not very bright, but I think we got to be careful with some of the light pollution that comes from that location for some homes that are very close by. I think I'll save the rest of my construction update for next week.
Thank you, Troy. I'm glad you're feeling better too. Sorry that you were out sick. I think we're done. As far as I know, we don't have a need for executive session, which is always a good thing. Is there a motion to adjourn our work session?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I was wondering if somebody was going to make it. There is a motion to adjourn our work session. Is there a second? Second. All right, all those in favor, raise your right hand. All right, we are adjourned.